Katagonia's Guide for Zoom Users. Panduan Katagonia untuk pengguna Zoom. Saat ini, host atau admin sudah mengaktifkan fitur interpretation. Bapak Ibu dipersilahkan untuk menggunakan Zoom versi terbaru agar fitur interpretation dapat bekerja dengan baik. The host has activated the interpretation feature. Ladies and gentlemen, you are expected to use Zoom. Please install the latest version for the interpretation feature work well. Please go to www.zoom.us/download. Mohon Bapak Ibu menonaktifkan mic atau mengklik tombol mute apabila tidak sedang berbicara. To help today's meeting run smoothly, please mute when you are not speaking. Jika Bapak Ibu ingin mendengarkan terjemahan dalam bahasa Indonesia, klik interpretation, pilih Indonesian. Anda tidak perlu pindah channel saat berbicara. Jangan khawatir, pembicara dan interpreter dapat mendengar Anda. If you'd like to listen in English, click interpretation, then choose English. You don't need to change channel when speaking. Don't worry, the resource person and the interpreter will be able to hear your voice. Untuk pengguna Zoom Mobile, klik More untuk masuk ke pilihan berikutnya. Pilih Language Interpretation. Lalu pilih Indonesian untuk bahasa Indonesia. For Zoom mobile users, click More to go to the next choice. Then, choose Language Interpretation. Then, choose English for English. Mohon dipastikan bahwa Bapak Ibu sudah memilih salah satu bahasa yang akan digunakan. Karena jika Bapak dan Ibu tidak memilih, suara Bapak dan Ibu akan mengganggu pembicara dan proses penerjemahan. Terima kasih atas perhatian dan kerjasamanya. Please make sure that you have selected the correct language for not making any noises for both speakers and interpreters. Thank you for your attention and cooperation. Jika ada kendala mengenai fitur ini, silakan hubungi host yang sedang bertugas atau hubungi IT support. If you have any technical problems regarding this feature, feel free to chat the host on duty. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The fourth day of Ministry of Finance Learning Week is about to begin. But before that, let me take a moment to review several technical details. First, to help us recognize you, please rename your ID with the format unit_name. Second, to reduce noise and prevent any sound problems, please mute your audio, but do not forget to activate your video. Last but not least, I would like to remind all participants that you can drop your questions via Zoom chat or Slido that we've provided. And also, we want to know your feedback about this webinar, so please fill out the evaluation form after joining the session on the link that we will share with you in the chat box. Participants who want to get the e-certificate, please ensure that you fill out the evaluation form and join this webinar until the end. Today's webinar will be conducted in English. However, it comes with English-Indonesian simultaneous interpretation. To listen to the translation, click the globe icon or three dots icon. Select interpretation and choose English or Indonesian accordingly. It is advised that you do not click the mute original audio because if you wish to do so, to obtain a clearer audio rendition, please make sure to manually switch off the interpretation when someone on the floor is speaking in the language you are listening. This webinar is also available on our YouTube channel, PPPK Kemenkeu. That's all the information. Let's now begin the Ministry of Finance Learning Week Day 4, becoming a knowledge-sharing organization. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to Ministry of Finance Learning Week Day 4, becoming a knowledge-sharing organization, which is also the last day of Ministry of Finance Learning Week this year. First and foremost, I would like to thank God the Almighty that has blessed us to attend this webinar virtually. And I would like to extend a very warm welcome to the Director of Education and Training Center of Leadership and Managerial, Bapak Wahyu Kusuma Ramadhani, senior officials from Ministry of Finance and other ministries and agencies in Indonesia, our distinguished guest speaker, Steffen Soulejman Janus. Best regards to all participants who have joined us today. We are very grateful for your enthusiasm because right now we have around 200 participants joining us via YouTube and Zoom. Dear participants, to officially open this webinar, may we invite the Director of Education and Training Center of Leadership and Managerial, Bapak Wahyu Kusuma Ramadhani, to give the welcoming remarks. Pak Doni, the time is yours.
Okay. Thanks Mbak Titis. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the fourth day of the Ministry of Finance Learning Week 2022. First of all, I would like to give my warm greetings to honorable senior official from Ministry of Finance and other ministries, agency, our speakers, Mr. Steffen Soulejman Janus, our moderator, Ms. Evi Diah Indrawati, and distinguished participants. Today is the last day of the Ministry of Finance Learning Weeks 2022. In the past 3 days, we have been engaged in various topics. On the first day of the Learning Week series, we had Martin Mokrer, who talked about the future of corporate learning. From his session, we learned that organization has shifted its function from a learning provider to a learner enabler, and that the learning transformation should support digital transformation in organization. And then on the second day, Etienne Wenger shared his thought on community of practices, or COP, and the keys to a successful COP, which is to start with what we are practicing at the moment and continuously learn in the process. He also highlighted the importance of leadership in the determining COP's success. After we gained some knowledge on the first and the second day of the MOF Learning Week, we then learned how to learn with Barbara Oakley. She shared her experience in improving her own learning, supported by scientific proof about how the brain works. She also informed us of some techniques that can be used in order to learn something better. Providing you with those topics is one of our ways to build a learning organization that systematically facilitates learners to grow and transform continuously in order to support the achievement of the organization's goals. And to be a learning organization requires knowledge management, which is actually dependent on a learning organization. It's like a debate on which comes first, the chicken or the egg. But that's not the point that we are going to discuss today. The important thing is that knowledge management is a crucial element in building a learning organization. Ladies and gentlemen, you must have heard the cliche, knowledge is power. But what is the use of knowledge if it is trapped inside the head of our employees? Imagine how many times our organization has lost valuable knowledge and expertise when an employee leaves or retires. Moreover, most employees are working in remote or hybrid work setting, as we do in the MOF at the moment. This creates a workforce dependent on shared information. For that reason, collecting and managing knowledge or information throughout the organization is critical. In the MOF, the knowledge management has been supported by a knowledge management system we called Kemenkeu Learning Center or KLC2. However, information and technology infrastructure is a thing, but getting people to utilize the system and share their knowledge is another thing that is far more challenging. Some barriers exist from the internal and external factor within individuals that prevent them from sharing. Today, we will have an insightful talk from Mr. Steffen Janus. He is a Senior Operation Officer at World Bank's Global Practice for Social, Urban, Rural, and Resilience Development, where he manages and supports innovative social development and decentralization projects. Mr. Janus conceived and developed the World Bank's offerings of organizational knowledge sharing methods to public sector institutions and senior management teams across the world. Hi, Mr. Janus, good morning or good evening, Azure. Thank you for accepting our invitation. It's an honor for us to have you here today. I believe it's now around 10 p.m. in Washington, so thank you once again for making time for us. Ladies and gentlemen, today Mr. Janus will share with us how to become a knowledge sharing organization. I believe that we will get an insightful session with him and get some input on how to accelerate knowledge sharing in our institution. Last but not least, I wish you a very meaningful learning session today. Please take as much as possible of this session and then share it with your colleagues to help accelerate the knowledge sharing culture in your institution. That's all from me. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Pak Doni, for the opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for the main event we've been waiting for. To begin with, let me introduce our moderator today, Bu Evi Diah Indrawati. Bu Evi, that's what she's usually called, has been providing training for corporate classes since 2003 at the Financial Education and Training Agency. She is also a visiting lecturer at several colleges and universities and has published numerous publications. Without further ado, Bu Evi, the screen is for you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mbak Titis, for the nice introduction. And it's an honor for me to be here, and I'd like to welcome our honorable guests and audience who have joined us today either in this Zoom meeting or through our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Before we start, I'd like to announce some housekeeping information to the audience. So, ladies and gentlemen, our honorable guests, if you don't mind, please keep your camera on and your microphone muted throughout the entire talk. The presenter's talk, Steffen's talk, will go on for about 15 minutes, followed by a discussion session. But, okay, Steffen, take your time. Yeah. And to the audience, feel free to ask your questions, and there are several ways to do that. So if you are joining from Zoom, you can either write down your question in the Zoom chat feature, and I will read them, or click on the raise button, and I will call your name later. And you can unmute yourself and then ask your questions. If you're joining us through live streaming on YouTube, please write down your question in the live chat feature and I will read them for you. So again, you can either write your question in the Zoom chat or YouTube chat box or by the raise hand feature on Zoom. Okay, now allow me to introduce our speaker, Steffen Soulejman Janus, who will deliver his talk titled Becoming a Knowledge Sharing Organization. Let me first read his short bio. Steffen Soulejman Janus is a seasoned organizational change facilitator with over 20 years of experience working with the private, public sector, and academic organizations and teams around the world to help them define and achieve their goals. He has deep expertise in organizational learning, change management, knowledge management, communications, innovation, and leadership. And Steffen currently works in the World Bank's global practice on social sustainability and inclusion, on knowledge and learning initiative and social risk management country system. Prior to joining the World Bank, he founded and led a design, digital communications, and knowledge management consultancy. At the World Bank, he worked in different functions, leading teams on learning design, e-learning, South-to-South knowledge exchange, and organizational knowledge sharing. As a change maker, he co-developed the African Platform for Development Effectiveness, APDEF, and the Global Partnership on Knowledge Sharing, JPKS. He has authored numerous articles and publications on organizational learning and change management, knowledge sharing and learning, and the latest being capturing solutions for learning and scaling up. And finally, Steffen holds an MBA from Columbia University in New York City. Wow, very impressive, yeah? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Steffen. Good evening, Steffen, how are you?
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction, Ibu. That's I'm really honored to be with you and to join you all for this fantastic and important event that you're organizing this week. Thank you so much for the invitation.
I especially want to thank you first for setting aside your time with us today. Yeah, I know it's around 10 p.m. in Washington time. Yeah, so yeah, it's really nice to have you with us now. And you know, we are so excited, yeah, as this is the last day of our learning week. So you know, this is our motto, yeah, the last day, we always save the best for last. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, allow me to present you our speaker, Steffen Soulejman Janus. The screen is yours, Steffen.
Thank you so much, Ibu, and welcome everybody again. And I'm really excited to be here with you today and talk about knowledge sharing, which is one of the big passions I have and that has accompanied my professional career over many years. And I'm always excited when organizations talk about change management and knowledge sharing and learning. These are for me the fundamentals of an organization. And when I heard that the ministry is embarking on this journey of learning around or becoming a knowledge sharing or learning organization, I got really excited. I had the privilege and the honor to having worked in Indonesia over several years now, and I'm going to share some of the examples and lessons that I drew from some of this work over the years with you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to start to share my screen and load a presentation. Give me 1 second to bring that up. I hope you can see that. Yes, I hope it's visible. I'm not quite sure whether it's being shown.
Yeah, we can see the screen.
Fantastic. All right. So the whole discussion that we're going to have today is centering around what does it mean to become a knowledge sharing organization? What does it mean? Why would we even want to embark on such a endeavor, right? And so the first question I always start with any engagement when I speak to organizations around organizational knowledge sharing and thinking about how to become a knowledge sharing organization is, why would you want to do that? What are the benefits of becoming a knowledge sharing organization? What's in it for you? What's in it for anybody? And what I tend to get as answers are, I mean, and these are just some examples of the many messages that are being conveyed then to me is that leaders in the organization, in the senior management, want to empower their staff to make more informed decisions, or they want partners and clients become a valuable inspiration for their various staff and teams, or they recognize that a success of a specific activity, a project, or any other engagement will depend heavily on the collaboration across the teams or departments in the organization. Others say experienced experts, and I think Doni mentioned this earlier, have left the organization, and all of a sudden the organization finds itself in the process of having to train people again, relearn basically those who are left behind in the organization that have not yet benefited from the experience of those who may have retired earlier, right? Others will say that lessons naturally get lost over time if they don't get documented, because people will tend to forget and we move on to the next project, to the next endeavor, right? And so it's very easy to forget important lessons learned and experiences that, as Padoni mentioned earlier, that are stuck in our heads, right? I mean, if the experiences that we are making every day are experiences that that if we don't share, we keep them for us, and we may benefit from them, but nobody else will unless we share those experiences and lessons learned. And so the questions are on the why, and that why can happen at several levels, right? So organizations may ask, why does knowledge sharing matter for us as an organization, right? And there might be several answers to that question. At the same time, the staff in that organization may also ask, why would that be important for us, right? And at a very high level, even at the country level, the strategy of a country and the government may also be influenced by knowledge sharing. And there may also be certain objectives and goals that a country may have when it comes to knowledge sharing, sharing the expertise with other countries, for example. So there are numerous reasons, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into the why, right? And common operational goals or objectives that organizations set for themselves is that they overcome the fact that knowledge stays in people's heads instead of getting captured for sharing and reuse, right? So that's one of those barriers that organizations try to crack. We often don't know what experts know or don't know. We don't know how to find the person that may be able to help us when we encounter a specific issue or problem or challenge in our work. Who do we contact? Who can we rely on to help us find the best way? How can we avoid reinventing the wheel when we are stuck with a specific problem? And at the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia, you are all problem solvers, right? Every day you come to work, whatever you're working on, you are a problem solver because you are encountering numerous problems, right? And your job is to find solutions to those problems, and that's what you're doing, right? And very often those solutions that you find are quite innovative. You have to innovate, the question is then, once you found a solution by trial and error, maybe some solutions may work, others may not work, but eventually you get to a solution that works for you, that works to solve a specific challenge, to overcome a specific barrier that you were working on. And now you're probably not going to be the only person in the ministry or in Indonesia or even worldwide that has encountered that specific problem, right? But now you are special because you have found a solution. Now you can keep that solution for yourself, or you can share that solution with others, so they can, next time they encounter a similar problem, get a quicker answer to that problem, right? And of course, every situation is different, contexts vary, but by and large, you can make a more informed decision if you can rely on a peer or somebody who has made an experience that he or she can share with you. So an objective is to overcome the goal or to overcome the obstacle that we don't really know who to ask for when we encounter a challenge and where to find the solution. Sometimes information resources may be out of date, right? So you may have already systems and platforms in place, and as in every large organization, that can easily become out of hand, right? As you add new knowledge and information to that system, and new data points are added every day, it becomes a monster. And it becomes increasingly difficult to find anything on that on that platform, and at times some of these knowledge resources or data points, whatever you're looking for, may be out of date because new data points have taken their place, and you're stuck with old or outdated information. Sometimes you face the challenge that the right people have not access to the information that they need, right? And we've all encountered this, that certain information or even knowledge may be only shared in certain circles, right? Maybe it is in a specific department that they are working on something, and they're not really sharing that knowledge with colleagues in other departments, maybe because they don't think it's relevant for them, right? But having an understanding of who knows what, who's working on what, and who makes which experiences, and working on which parts of the knowledge equation can be quite important to make the organization more effective. Because at the end of the day, the ministry, you're all working hand in glove. You're all working together on solutions for the country at large, for the government, and for the citizens of Indonesia. Sometimes a simple problem is that people are not necessarily working together enough, right? And as an organization, the moment you structure your organization in different departments, in different units, teams, you are creating boundaries, you are creating divisions, you're creating silos, right? As soon as you put a name on a department, you have effectively created a silo. And that was probably not your intention as an organization, but all our organizations have to organize themselves and have to create structures. And by doing so, they tend to then also create silos, because you're creating specific groups of people that are working on a specific objective or task or set of tasks in that department or in that unit or in that team. And that sets them apart from their colleagues that work on different objectives and different activities and tasks. Once you have those different set of objectives, if they're not properly linked, and if there are not mechanisms in place to shatter those silos, to shatter those walls that you've just created, knowledge sharing is becoming very, very difficult within the organization. Right? It might happen at the department level, it might happen at the unit level, but across units, across departments, you may have to make an extra effort to create ways to break those silos and to share knowledge. A last one which is an obvious obstacle can be that people don't find the information they need, right? And we all know about the various search engines that exist in the world. I mean, Google is probably the most well-known one. It's an entire mechanism that just exists to help people find information that they're looking for, right? So search engines and platforms relying increasingly on mechanisms that allow the users to find the knowledge or the information that they're looking for, right? And so that might be another obstacle that you may need to crack, is how do we make sure that our staff are finding the knowledge or the information, and I'm not using these two words interchangeably because they're slightly different, but it applies to both. How do we make sure that people find those pieces, those nuggets of knowledge, those nuggets of information, or even data points in a just-in-time manner when they need it. So these are some of the obstacles. Coming back to the why question is, why do we need knowledge sharing? And one of the answers is it increases operational effectiveness. Ultimately, the goal is for any organization, whether it's in the private sector or in the public service, like the ministry, you want to make sure that you are making an optimal use of your resources, right? You want to do more and better in less time. You want to be very effective with your resources. And knowledge sharing can help you to achieve that, right? If you, as I mentioned earlier, if you have access to an experience of a colleague that may have already found a solution to a problem that you are currently facing, you can go to that colleague, or you can look up the lessons learned from that particular experience, and that can inform your decision. And likely you're going to make a more informed decision, and likely you're going to make a better decision because you're basing your decision on empirical evidence. You can overcome barriers faster, right? Instead of starting to ponder around, to innovate yourself and thinking about what I do to overcome this problem, you can already take in the data points from past experiences, and those inform your decision making, and it just helps you to crack that nut in a faster way. In terms of resources, you can also do more with less, right? Problem solving tends to be resource intensive, whether it's spending time or more people working on a problem. You may be getting information that helps you to overcome the problem faster, and you're likely going to save important resources for your organization, right? Another point is that knowledge sharing provides continuity in your operations. And we talked already a little bit about the idea when people leave the organization, they may retire, and usually it's people who have been in the organization for many years that retire at the end of their careers. And those are, of course, valuable knowledge assets in your organization, right? When they leave and they take their knowledge with them because it's in their heads, it has not been documented or captured by the organization, that presents a significant loss for the organization. We will need to think through as organizations of how can we harness the knowledge that we're generating on a day-to-day basis for the organization, so it doesn't get lost once people leave. And people leave all the time for all kinds of reasons, right? Maybe they get better job opportunities elsewhere, or they retire. For whatever the reason is, every organization is very dynamic, and you want to make sure that you have mechanisms in place that allow to document and capture the essence of their knowledge, get it out of their heads. It's usually tacit knowledge that they have, right? It's knowledge that comes from experiences that they have made in their professional work on a daily basis. And if that does not get captured in some way and harnessed and documented and turned into explicit knowledge, right? Then the organization is at risk of losing that knowledge. And once that knowledge is lost, it's very hard to get it back, right? It's gone forever. So I would tend to summarize the question on the why sort of with three simple answers. I mean, the first answer is it increases the effectiveness of the service delivery of the organization, right? The more knowledge sharing you have in the organization, the more likely you are going to be more effective in what you do, for the reasons I outlined earlier, right? And for that, you will need to develop a knowledge sharing culture and better collaboration across silos. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, or how you do that. The second point for why knowledge sharing is so critical is that you want to increase the sustainability of service delivery, right? So the service that you deliver to your constituents we want to make sure that there's continuity and reliability and sustainability in those services. And again, the more likely you can mitigate against the risk that knowledge is getting lost for the institution and institutional memory is basically not being built, the more likely you're losing the sustainability aspect, and and both the quality and the reliability of your services will decrease. The third point, and the third reason why knowledge sharing is so important for organizations is that it allows them to replicate and scale up of what works, right? At the same time, also avoids experiences or solutions that haven't worked, right? So you're avoiding failures, and you're learning from those failures, and you replicate those processes, those solutions that have proven to be effective in a given environment, right? So it helps the organization to build on successes, avoid the mistakes, and ultimately improve the service delivery for its constituents, whether it's improving livelihoods of the citizens of Indonesia, or the shared prosperity of those various citizens, right? So ultimately, these three items should be, whether you're the Ministry of Finance of Indonesia or any other organization in the world, really are important aspects that any organization will need to think about when they ask the question of why should we even do this, right? And very often that question comes up, right? I mean, because there are so many priorities that organizations have, knowledge management, knowledge sharing may not be always at the top of the agenda, right? And it's useful to remind ourselves that without these pieces in place, without knowledge sharing, organizational knowledge sharing in place, you are at risk as an organization. You are at risk, right? You are at risk of being effective. You are at risk of not being sustainable, and you are at risk of multiplying and replicating failures that are not necessary, right? So those are some of the answers that I would give on the why question. But let's move to the what question. What is knowledge sharing? What is this in the first place? Now that we have a bit of an understanding of why we might want to invest in knowledge sharing, let's talk about the what. And I mentioned already earlier that some of these questions may come at three different levels. And let me start, and I see this as a pyramid, and I want to start at the bottom of that pyramid. And that is internal knowledge sharing within the organization. And that usually means that is knowledge sharing between staff, knowledge sharing between teams, between units, between departments. It is what I mentioned earlier, right? This idea of breaking silos within the organization, making sure that staff are connected with each other, that they're open with each other about knowledge sharing, that there is an organizational culture that promotes and encourages the sharing of experiences and lessons learned between its staff, because organizational priorities are that the organization becomes more effective, and the organization or the management of the organization understands, in order for that to be the case, people need to start to trust each other, they need to collaborate, they need to work together, and they need to be willing to share their experiences with each other. That is easier said than done, and we're going to get to what are some of the barriers and opportunities in that in a minute. The second level is of knowledge sharing, I would call domestic knowledge sharing. It is knowledge sharing within the country, right? And as a Ministry of Finance, and I think we have numerous colleagues connected today that are not sitting in Jakarta in headquarters, but they are sitting all across Indonesia and the various provinces and districts. So it is in your interest as Ministry of Finance to work very closely with local governments and with your domestic partners at various levels, because ultimately development happens not only in Jakarta, but it happens throughout the country. And of course, you are working in partnership and close collaboration with your counterparts at the various levels of government. In order to do that effectively, you will need to make sure that knowledge sharing happens, right? That the knowledge sharing is not only happening between staff in a given building in Jakarta, but that knowledge sharing is happening across the country, across and vertically down to the various levels of government. You will need to think through what kind of structures and incentive systems are in place for knowledge sharing to happen, right? As a Ministry of Finance, you want to make the most optimal informed decisions, for example, for policy reform or policy implementation. And in order to make those informed decisions, you will need to have feedback from your counterparts at the various levels of government, and to see what works, what doesn't, where do they find challenges, what are some of the lessons learned that they have drawn from policy implementation, right? Because that, again, informs your policy reform efforts in the ministry. Last but not least, and alluded to this earlier, knowledge sharing can also happen at the international level, right? It can happen between countries. I know, for example, that it has been for many years a strategic priority for Indonesia to share its knowledge with their partners in other countries, right? It is a form of the international collaboration between countries, very often organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right? In terms of their outreach efforts and their partnership efforts with other countries. And in that context, international cooperation is not only based on financial flows, but international cooperation can also be based on knowledge flows, right? And Indonesia has recognized for many, many years that knowledge is a very important asset that Indonesia can share with partner countries from around the world. Sometimes we call this South-South knowledge sharing, right? Or South-South knowledge exchanges. So knowledge sharing can also happen between countries, identifying certain experiences that countries know we're quite good at something, and we want to share that expertise with other partners because we know they can benefit from that particular experience. So those are sort of the three levels of knowledge sharing. Now let's drill down a little bit deeper, and when we look at the actual organization, right? And the World Bank, we've developed a framework for organizational knowledge sharing that is built on 8 pillars. And I would sort of separate these 8 pillars into 2 groups. One group I would see as focusing on the enabling environment for knowledge sharing, and the other group are the technical skills, the technical skills that are needed to share knowledge effectively. So when we quickly, and I'm going to quickly go through this, not in detail, I'm mindful of time, but the first part around the enabling environment starts with the leadership and the culture of the organization, right? And that is probably the foundation for anything that's going to happen in an organization when it comes to knowledge sharing. If you don't have leadership support, if you don't have a knowledge sharing culture, incentive systems and mechanisms that support knowledge sharing in the organization, that encourage staff to share knowledge, that build the trust between colleagues to work together, to share, to learn from each other, then you will likely not succeed at being a learning organization or a knowledge sharing organization, right? So that is a foundation that is absolutely critical. A second foundation that is, of course, very critical is governance systems. So how are we organizing ourselves to share knowledge most effectively? How are we organizing ourselves to learn most effectively? What kind of skills building processes are in place? What kind of skills do we need to share knowledge? And what kind of systems are supporting knowledge sharing and learning in our organization, right? So thinking through platforms, governance structures, and skill sets for knowledge sharing will be a second important factor to build an enabling environment that is conducive to learning and knowledge sharing. The third pillar is around financing. Now, we all know, nothing's going to happen if you don't have a budget for it, right? So it is very critical that organizations have a budget item and budget for knowledge sharing activities that support knowledge sharing across the organization. That is not a given for me, right? Often knowledge sharing or learning tends to be a little bit of an afterthought when it comes to budgeting. And so I would always encourage organizations to build knowledge sharing and learning into the budget. It needs to be there upfront. It needs to be part of the DNA of the organization. It needs to be funded. It can't be an unfunded mandate. If it's unfunded, it's likely not going to happen. And the last piece of the enabling environment that helps for knowledge sharing to thrive in an organization is partnerships, right? Recognizing that every organization in the world is not an island, but there are numerous organizations that we could benefit from, right? That our organization could benefit from, and creating those linkages, creating those partnerships around learning, about knowledge sharing can be extremely helpful for the organization. So those are the four aspects on the left side of this framework that tackle the enabling environment. On the right side, we have technical skills, which are equally important, right? So you can have a very conducive enabling environment for knowledge sharing, but if the people who are supposed to do it don't have the skills to do it, then you're probably likely not going to succeed either. So what kind of skills are needed? The first skill is around identifying and capturing knowledge, right? So understanding of what is worth capturing, what kind of experiences are worth capturing and later sharing in an organization. It's important to understand that, right? Knowing that many experiences are tacit experiences, right? We're talking about tacit knowledge that is derived from experiences that people are making every day when they come to work, right? I bet that every one of you that got up this morning, you had to overcome several obstacles, right? You had to travel to work. You had to find maybe your way through Jakarta traffic, which I know is not always an easy feat. Or you maybe experience a power outage somewhere, or whatever happens, right? I mean, you have to overcome certain obstacles. Once you're at work, you have to overcome certain obstacles, right? It might be an IT challenge. Maybe your internet is not working this morning, or your computer has some issues, right? Your laptop is not working. Maybe you have an emergency in your work area that needs to be addressed right away, right? So there's numerous challenges that we're facing on a day-to-day basis, and not all of them are worth capturing, right? So you're likely not going to have a knowledge sharing community of practice in the ministry that focuses on where do you find the best pizza in Jakarta, right? That is not a topic that is very relevant for a successful organizational effectiveness at the ministry. But there may be very well be critical business processes that the ministry is undertaking in terms of budgeting, in terms of implementation of specific national initiatives or subnational initiatives, be it fiscal transfers, etc., that require a lot of building on lessons learned and tacit knowledge, right? And so understanding what those processes are, learning from past experiences that have been made is very critical. And those types of challenges can be overcome if everybody in the organization is tuned in with a common understanding of, hey, maybe I'm onto something. Maybe this is something that we should actually be documenting because it can be helpful for other colleagues that are working on similar issues, right? Or maybe it could be helpful for somebody down the road in 2 years from now that will be working on a fiscal transfer initiative in Indonesia, right? So whatever it is, what you're working on, you're likely not going to be the only person in the ministry or in Indonesia that is facing that problem. Identification and then capturing that knowledge in a systematic way so it can be useful for your colleagues, right? How do you capture? Do you take your cell phone and you are going to take a little bit of a video, or are you going to write it down? Or what kind of systems do you have in place in the organization that allow you to capture and to document this knowledge so it can be made available to others later on in an effective manner? The second aspect, in terms of technical skills of the organization, is knowledge and learning products, right? How do you turn knowledge into learning? That is an interesting question, right? Because everything can be potentially relevant in an organization. But when we look at learning, very often we look at static courses, right? And learning is much more than just sitting in a course or in a 2-week training, or in a 1-week training, or in a 1-month training or course that your staff may take, right? Learning can be a vast set of different products, initiatives that can all make use of these knowledge assets that you have captured before, right? Sometimes learning can be most effective by somebody posting a small video on a lesson learned, maybe in a conversation that he or she had with one of the clients or constituents around an experience that they made, right? And sharing that via social media or any channel that you may have in place in the ministry can be very valuable, right? But that needs to be curated. That needs to be thought through. What kind of mechanisms are in place that allow to curate that knowledge in such a way that that you avoid misinterpretation, for example, right? And so the quality of the knowledge is critical for this. The next step is knowledge sharing. That is, of course, at the core of the entire exercise of a knowledge sharing organization. How do we share? How do we share knowledge in the organization? And there are numerous ways of how organizations can share knowledge, right? I understand earlier this week, you heard Etienne talk about communities of practice, which is a very excellent and effective way for organizations to share knowledge if they're set up in the right way and if they're properly managed. Communities of practice can be a powerful mechanism for people to share knowledge. There are other ways to share knowledge. You probably at the organizational level, you're producing several knowledge products, publications, reports. Those are all knowledge products that serve the purpose of knowledge sharing, right? And you may publish them, you may disseminate them through various channels. Maybe you organize conferences. That is another way of knowledge sharing, right? Maybe you have several meetings every week where groups of people that share a common agenda, a common work program, meet to discuss what are the best strategies to do this. And in these meetings, you likely share knowledge. There's numerous ways how we share knowledge, either face-to-face or through digital means, right? More and more knowledge sharing processes are done mobile, right, through various platforms. So there's numerous ways, and we need to, as organizations, we need to think through what are the most effective ways that we can put in place so the people that need the knowledge can have access to that in a just-in-time manner when they need it. The last part of this, the technical skills, is M&E, monitoring and evaluation, to understand what works and what doesn't, right? You want to continuously be on the pulse of knowledge sharing and understanding, has that knowledge sharing initiative worked, or do we need to change it here and there and tweak our approaches to make it more effective? So that is, in a nutshell, the 8 pillars of the organization knowledge sharing framework that we've developed. And usually what we do is we work with the teams on the implementation of these 8 pillars in various ways. And that takes me to the last point I wanted to mention, and that is the how. How do we do that? Right? So that is the big question now, is how do we become a knowledge sharing organization? What are some of the processes that you want to put in place as an organization to increase your ability to effectively share knowledge across the organization or with other organizations. And there are big barriers to that as well. And I just put a few bubbles up here of things that you may have in your mind or people think about when they talk about or when they hear others talk about knowledge sharing. And some of the things that you may think about is, I don't want to share. Why should I? Right? Why is that something I should be doing? I'm not paid to share knowledge. I'm paid to write a report or to come up with a policy or whatever you are hired to do, right? But you may not have knowledge sharing in your terms of reference, right? You may not have any reason why you want to share knowledge. Nobody's asking you to. Another thought that some of you may have is, I don't dare to ask. I don't want to ask my colleague about a solution because maybe I look stupid. Maybe I should probably know the answer, and I have all these degrees. I have my master degree and so, and I'm an expert in this, so I should know this, but actually I don't. But I still don't dare to ask because I fear of being regarded as not up to par with my job requirements, with my skills. So very often there's a barrier that we impose on ourselves to say, I don't want to ask my colleagues because they may look funny at me because they think I should know this, right? Others may say, well, knowledge sharing is all nice, but it's an unfunded mandate for us. I mean, at the ministry, this is not our core business. We're the Ministry of Finance. We're not in the business of selling knowledge, period. Right? So some people may say, well, this is not our mandate as an organization. We have another mandate. We have a vision. We have an agenda and specific targets that we need to fulfill. And knowledge sharing is not mentioned anywhere there. So why should we share knowledge, right? Others may say, oh, yeah, we've tried this so many times. We did this years ago, but nobody remembers this. This is an old agenda for us, and we've moved beyond, right? Others will say, I'm not getting paid for sharing, right? This is, I'm just doing my job here, and nobody's paying me extra because I share my knowledge, right? Some others may say, well, my boss never shares anything with me. Why should I share with others? Right. So maybe there's no culture. There's not the culture there in the organization, and people look up at their superiors and they say, "Well, they don't do it either. Why should I?" Right? Nobody cares if I share my expertise. Maybe there are no incentives for people to share because sharing is not being rewarded. It's nice if you do it, but quite frankly, nobody really is looking at that as a particular accomplishment or a value add in the organization, right? And again, this point of knowledge is not our core business. It's not something that we see as essential to fulfilling our mandate, right? So these are all some thoughts. Some of my past clients have spoken of about these thoughts quite openly, right? And those are all examples of or expressions of a knowledge sharing culture that is either there or is not yet very developed, right? And that is at the core of the how-to of embarking on this journey of becoming a knowledge sharing organization, is that the culture needs to be put in place, and we need to work on the systems. Not the technical systems. That's the easy part, right? The platforms, the websites, the intranets, the social media mechanisms and whatnot. That stuff we all know very well. We have plenty of good tools that can do this. What usually organizations are not doing that well on is creating that open culture, creating that trusted culture that allows for knowledge sharing to thrive. Okay. So in terms of a process, and I'm not going to go into the details of this, but there are numerous steps that we usually undertake when we're working with organizations, starting with a self-assessment, starting with a starting point to understand where are we currently at as an organization, right? Where are the things that we do well already in terms of knowledge sharing. When we look at these 8 pillars that I just introduced, in which pillars are we doing fairly good, and in which pillars do we need to change things and mean to become better, right? Usually the way we organize this work is that we're looking at a self-assessment that we're having you undertake that looks at various dimensions and indicators that allow you to start to see a little bit for yourself what works and what doesn't, right? Where do you want to put your priorities in terms of a change management process, right? Very often that change management process starts with the various underlying factors, right? Policies, practices, governance structures, staffing, and a great way to kickstart the work is to look at some rapid results, to look at quick wins, if you will, right? I mean, what can we put in place very quickly that really changes the equation, that really changes the way we do things for the better, and get people excited about the opportunity of knowledge sharing. And those quick wins exist in every organization, and you just have to find them and put them in place. And very often they can be really rewarding and fun, right? But this is all about creating positive incentives for knowledge sharing, right? That entice the colleagues across the units in the departments to come together and work together and enjoy each other's company and enjoy each other's experiences and learn from each other, right? So a big part of the learning in the future, and you've probably heard this other colleagues say throughout the week, is about learning day to day, right? It's not only learning from structured courses, structured learning, but it's learning as we go, learning by doing, learning just in time when we need to find a solution to something, getting the knowledge that we need, applying that, and feeding the experiences back into a system that others can then, again, also benefit from that learning. And then there's numerous aspects around, I mentioned these already, creating capacities around knowledge capturing, developing the knowledge sharing systems. How do we document? How do we process knowledge? What kind of tools are we using? What kind of quality control mechanisms are we putting in place to make sure that whatever knowledge is in our system is also verified and validated? What kind of platforms and systems do we use for that? And then what kind of approaches are we using for knowledge sharing, right? And what kind of learning offerings are we developing that are based on up-to-date knowledge, latest insights that are not coming from academia, but that are coming from our own staff, that are coming from our clients, from our counterparts in the local governments that are facing specific challenges, and we feed those challenges directly back into our learning, right? Those experiences and lessons learned are often much more valuable than reciting or quoting some research that was done somewhere in Washington or somewhere else. It's really that hands-on knowledge that is being generated on the ground all across Indonesia is what really makes a big difference for learning in your organization. And then last but not least, you want to then turn that into pilots. You want to implement that system, right? You want to start using that very quickly. Maybe initially, you want to do pilots in a specific area. You want to try that out. You want to learn from that. And once you're comfortable with the system, then you can take it to scale. And I know what scale means in Indonesia, having worked for many years there. It's a massive undertaking, right? Because taking things to scale in Indonesia is really quite a challenge because of the distances and the physical distances that you have to overcome. This is another way of looking at that journey, right? From the self-assessment to identifying roles and responsibilities, organizing this culture change, developing systems and processes that are integrated, documenting experiences, sharing those in pilots, integrating the learning into learning offerings, and then taking it to scale. I'm not going to go in detail over this. I just want to mention a few quick examples of where we have worked in Indonesia on some of these knowledge sharing engagements. The very first engagement that I was involved in a knowledge sharing in Indonesia was with BNPP on disaster risk management, and that was a really rewarding experience where we worked with BNPP on all these three levels, right? Internally, we looked at the knowledge and learning culture within the organization, and that was, to give you one example, that resulted in daily staff knowledge sharing sessions that were very often joined even by the minister who came in, the head of BNPP came in and listened into these knowledge sharing sessions. So these were made mandatory, and every BNPP staff had to share, I think, at least once a month or something, had to share an insight. And that was a really fascinating way of organizing learning on a day-to-day basis, right? Day-by-day basis. The second level was domestic knowledge sharing, and of course, BNPP is working all across Indonesia with the local governments, with the BPPDs, and staff training was very critical because when a disaster hits, it's likely not only in Jakarta; it can be anywhere in Indonesia. So having the ability to rely on experiences and lessons learned from disaster management processes that happen on the ground, feeding that back to headquarters and drawing the important lessons for future disaster preparedness is of course critical for BNPP. And last but not least, BNPP also became a center of excellence internationally, and it shared its experience with many partners, Myanmar, Philippines, Colombia, all around the world, with countries that are also facing similar disasters. And BNPP is an expert, right? Because they have worked in this area for so long. But the initial driver for this engagement was really the experience in Aceh at the time, right? When many of the experienced disaster risk experts eventually retired, right? So when we started this engagement, most of the colleagues and the specialists that had worked on Aceh were no longer in the organization, and so we had to bring them back in as retirees and work with them and harness their knowledge, because there was a wealth of knowledge that at the time was not captured, right? And if you don't capture it, again, it gets lost. Another example that I quickly want to share is the Village Innovation Program, the program Inovasi Desa. That was it was a World Bank financed program that was implemented by the Ministry of Villages. A really fascinating program at the time, where across thousands of villages, at the end I think it was over 15,000 villages in 432 districts across Indonesia. Bursa Inovasi were organized. So these village innovation fairs were organized where villages shared experiences with investments of the village transfer funds, right? And the objective of this program was to diversify the spending, right? To encourage and stimulate villages to invest the village funds in more innovative and useful investments in their village, right? And as a result of these Bursa Inovasi, the villages started to share good practice examples or innovations that they came up with that really boosted the well-being of the village, right? And they shared that with other villages, and those villages got inspired. And out of that, they changed their village development plans, right? And that was, of course, the ultimate objective of this program, that that villages make participatory decisions around village investment planning, and that they make more informed decisions, right? That not every village is building a bridge because that's what villages do, but they actually make participatory decisions on priorities and innovations that they develop that really solve problems that they are facing, right? And out of that program, through these village innovation fairs, through these Bursa Inovasi, lots of new and interesting innovations were harnessed all across Indonesia, with thousands and thousands of innovations and knowledge bits that were mobilized through bottom-up processes from the villages themselves. It's a really exciting program. There were numerous criteria of what villages were documenting, what is a good practice, what were interesting community initiatives, challenges that got solved through innovations, different methods, approaches, etc. Right? There's all kinds of criteria that we've developed to identify potential innovations. Last but not least, and that's my last example, was our work with BPKP on auditing, and BPKP had also was striving to really create closer linkages with their offices all across Indonesia to make sure that the knowledge flows on auditing are properly managed, and everybody is on the same page on what happens in which policy implementations and regulations need to be implemented, how, what are some of the obstacles for sound auditing that the various local level organizations are facing, and how BPKP can support the identification and learning around these, and to support this, several communities of practice have been created within BPKP to facilitate knowledge sharing. They have revamped their learning processes in BPKP, and through a knowledge sharing platform, those experiences were also documented and shared. So that's oh yeah, and maybe my last image, BPKP was then also, they received visits from colleagues. This was, I think, a Kenya delegation that visited a BPKP center in Bali to learn from them. So there was also an international knowledge sharing dimension that was included there. But I spoke way longer than I initially intended. So let me stop here and ask you if you have any questions on any of the things that I was mentioning. Over to you.
Thank you, Steffen, for the insightful and comprehensive presentation. We don't really mind if you take over time because we have a fuller understanding of the topic here. And I found some interesting points that I note from your presentation here. So we have heard from you the reasons and also the importance of knowledge sharing organization, especially in relevance to common challenges pertaining to capturing information or knowledge or experience in our organization. And so knowledge sharing, we can share things within the organization and within the country and eventually international. And I like it. I know that international cooperation can be in terms of knowledge sharing, so south to south exchanges here. And we need some enabling environment and technical skills to get there. You call that 8 pillars, or foundation for knowledge sharing organization. Now, okay, I see that we have quite a lot of questions from our audience, so it's time to address them. Let me go to the slides here. Okay, we have a question from Wahyu Dewaji. So this is his question. What about if an organization or individual who has knowledge not welcome to share? Or maybe I can make it clear like this, Steffen, because sometimes it doesn't always success story. Sometimes we have failure, and some people think it is embarrassing, right, to share stories like that. So what do you think about that, Steffen?
It's a great question. And you're absolutely right? I mean, so there are experiences can be successful and they can sometimes fail, right? I mean, not every project, not every activity, not every engagement that we are undertaking is always successful. And sometimes we have to take several steps at a problem, right? We may try a solution, it doesn't work, we have to try a different solution, maybe it doesn't work again, and we iterate and we try another way to get to the solution. Maybe that works then, right? And then we get to the success. But it's not always a linear process, right? It might be an iterative process. What is interesting is very often we are conditioned as organizations to only share that last step. And I would not even say that we share the last step on the how we get to that result, right? We only share the results. And as you know, at the Ministry of Finance and similar in my organization, the World Bank, we very often look at data in terms of results, right? So the reports that we're requiring from our projects are looking at data points that illustrate results, right? How many roads have been built? How many kilometers of roads have been built? How many hospitals have been built? How many school books have been delivered to a given school district or whatever, right? I mean, so we're measuring, we're counting basically certain results. And while that is fair and it's a way to measure success, in terms of knowledge, that becomes almost irrelevant, right? When we look at knowledge sharing, I'm not interested in the results. I mean, yes, that's an interesting fact that I would like to hear at the end. But what I'm really interested to hear about is how did you get to the result, right? What was the process that you had to go through in order to get to that result? And that's what knowledge sharing is all about, right? It's about learning about solution paths. And sometimes these solution paths can be challenging, right? They're not linear, they're not simple. People are struggling to get to the result, right? And we all have obstacles that we have to overcome to get to a result. And the incentive is often to say, oh yeah, you look at me, I was so good, I did this, it was easy, and I received and I got to this result. But maybe the process was not that as simple, right? And we don't want to mention the fact that we may have failed 5 times until we actually got to the 6th time and we got to that result. The incentives are stacked against us in a sense, right? And so that is part of the organizational culture that needs to be developed, where people in the management of the organization welcome failure. Now that sounds initially counterintuitive, right? But big organizations like Google or Amazon or other big players are actually welcoming their staff to make mistakes. Learning by failure, right? So they even organize fail fairs, right? I mean, events where people just share failures, right? And they celebrate failures, not because they like failure so much, but because they know that those failures, once shared, will help their staff to never make those mistakes again.
Very true.
Right? So an open culture that encourages sharing of failures is going to be a much more effective culture in terms of the organizational performance, because it openly addresses, shares those mistakes, and thereby addresses these mistakes and makes sure that staff are not going to go for that solution path because they know it is likely not going to work, right? It hasn't worked in the past. They're going to share then also hopefully those solution paths that have worked, right? And it's again one way of shortcutting a process through knowledge sharing and making works more effective. Now, but I think that what I heard in the question was also maybe we're not incentivized to do that, right? And so for organizations to put in incentive systems that allow sharing to happen and that celebrate sharing. My advice for an organization would be not to start with learning from failure type of approaches, because that is not easy to convince staff in the beginning, right? When you're just embarking on a knowledge sharing journey, it is easier to start with sharing of success stories. Those are easier to share because everybody's proud of them, right? I mean, you're as a staff, you're much more proud to share an experience that has worked than putting yourself in front of hundreds of people and say, look, I messed up. So as an initial stage, I would say knowledge sharing of success stories would be probably easier to get started with. And then later on, once the culture is really more developed and you have really a strong trust between staff, then you can start to do fail fairs and those types of mechanisms.
Yeah, thank you, Steffen, for the answer. Yeah, I also agree that it is easier to share more motivating stories, yeah, with successes, yeah. But also value can be insightful or valuable, yeah, if we can learn from that. So, okay, I hope that answers your question, yeah, Mas Wahyu Dewaji. Now it's time to turn to Zoom room here. We have several people raise hand here. Let's go first to Mr. Rinto Yobel. Can you unmute yourself and please make your question brief? Yeah. You are still muted, sorry, Rinto. Can you please unmute yourself? We cannot hear you. Committee, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay,
can you hear
now
my
it's clear
voice?
now. Okay, go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you. Thank you, Moderator. Hello, Steffen. My name is Rinto. I'm currently working for the Audit Board of Indonesia. I was going to ask you about the incentive actually and compensation. I think you just explained it, but because I would think that people with information, people with knowledge would think that why would I share information that I gained after years of studying, working, or training, even spending a lot of money for people, for other people for free. So I was going to ask you about, is it okay if we give incentive or compensation for people who are willing to share this information? And not only that, for government institution now in Indonesia, at least for the past several years, we have started to implement the merit system and talent management. So one of the things that we do is now we have to try to find a successor in a more competitive way. So people would think, why would I share information or knowledge when that's the information, that's knowledge is something that differentiates me, that distinguishes me with other candidates for succession. So people would think that, why would I share that information? Especially now in government institution, people want to be candidate for succession plan. They would think that this information is so valuable for me. So I would not share this information for other people. At least for me, my selfish version of me would think that way. So what do you think about that? Thank you.
What a great question. Yeah, no, thank you so much for this question. I mean, and I think that is that gets at the core of a knowledge sharing culture.
Keputusan itu merupakan hasil akhir ya. Hasil akhir yang mana harus dilakukan.
I think I hear the Indonesian translation right now in Bahasa Indonesia. So this is an interesting question because it gets at the core of what organizations will need to do to put in place incentive systems, right? So you're absolutely right? So the intuitive reaction of somebody that I ask, now share your knowledge with me, is, why would I do that? What is in it for me? I mean, so I learned all this, so when it comes to the next promotion, you're going to get my promotion because I shared my knowledge with you, and you're going to be better than me, right? So there are all these thoughts that people would not talk about, but that's sort of in people's minds, right? I mean, why would I give my competitive edge to a potential competitor, right? That potentially drives me out of my job, right? And those fears are there, right? So let me first say why I do think those fears should be overcome, right, at the individual level. And organizations need to explain to staff. I mean, the moment you share something, you're already 10,000 miles ahead, right? You're already at the next step. You're sharing past experiences, right? We're making experiences every day. as a working professional, you are making experiences every day, right? So when you share a past experience, very likely you're already working on the next project, you're working already on the next thing, you're already a step ahead in a sense in the types of work that you're doing, right? So I would not worry about competitiveness. Similarly, in a culture where that incentivizes knowledge sharing, that sharing should be rewarded, right? You should benefit from sharing. That does not necessarily mean that it's a monetary reward, right? I mean, I'm not sure that knowledge sharing should be something that is payable, right? It's not a currency that should become a payable asset in the organization. But there are other ways that organizations can incentivize knowledge sharing, right? I mean, and it can be as simple as your boss thanking you for it, right? When was the last time your boss has thanked you for something, right? And said, thank you, Ibu, that was so nice. And I'm really glad that you did this, and I'm proud of you, and you really helped our organization or our department in this. Very often, just a simple thank you can really motivate us, right? If our boss tells us, thank you, Steffen, I really appreciate what you did there. This was great. I liked it. It was useful. It was powerful, and it really helped all your peers and colleagues. Thank you so much. Very often, that simple thank you can be enough to motivate me. I mean, it makes us feel good, right? If our boss comes to us and says, thank you, you did a great job, that makes us feel good, right? And probably tomorrow, we may come back to the job and we do the same thing again because we know our boss likes it, right? So very often those incentives don't have to be very complicated. It can be a simple thank you. It can be a pat in the back. It can also be an award. I mean, there's different ways of recognition, right? I mean, you can celebrate knowledge sharing through awards, a knowledge sharing award. I mean, at the World Bank, we had several awards that we gave every fiscal year to those teams who did most knowledge sharing, right? And we had at some point in time, I think even also fail fairs where people were awarded to share failures. So you can put in place mechanisms that that incentivize knowledge sharing with very simple means, right? Of course, there's also other ways you can say, well, those who engage in most knowledge sharing, maybe they get a special training in something, right? I mean, you can give them rewards that might be meaningful for their career, right? You may also want to put it into results agreements, right? And into performance targets, right? And some of the knowledge sharing can be measurable, right? And you can potentially even create a knowledge currency around it, right? The more useful other colleagues find your knowledge that you shared, the more your currency in the organization goes up, right? And that might be recognized in a future promotion, right? So you could turn the tables on this whole promotion argument, and you could flip it around. You could say those colleagues who share the most should be the colleagues who are promoted, right? Because they are the ones that are most open. They're probably, not probably, but very, very likely the ones who contribute most to the organization. They're so selfless, and they want to make sure that the ministry at large is benefiting from their knowledge. They take their knowledge to scale. They're the ones who are the most valuable assets for the organization. So in a knowledge sharing organization, that behavior will be rewarded, right? And it would be rewarded by advancing careers and motivating everybody to follow the good example of those who share knowledge, to overcome those fears that you rightly said that can be there.
I couldn't agree with you more, Steffen. So at least you have personal satisfaction, yeah. Once somebody reward you, with simple thank you, it just make you happy, yeah? And you have also better reputation here. So I hope that answered Rinto's question. Let's move on to the next person on the screen here. We have Mr. Iwan Dharma from DJKN. Can you please unmute yourself, Pak Iwan?
Okay,
go ahead.
Good morning, Steffen. Very impressive presentation you got there. Okay. Okay. According your presentations, common operations, one of your common operation challenges is the information resource, the absoluteness of your information resources. Okay, we face the fact between developed and developing country. There is knowledge gap. Maybe, and according to today, the internet thing, we can access information from around the world freely. And of course, we love following international forum or etc. And we know that all the posts being 5 years ago, 7 years ago, what we think they are still relevant with our condition. Do you think if we keep doing that, we will remain left behind? Because you know the world moves fast like lightning years, and we are still here. We access international resources, but it last year ago, and today in Indonesia is still relevant. How to minimize the gap between developed country and developing country in this case? Thank you, Steffen.
Wow, that's a really interesting question. Thanks so much, Pa. So I have a bit of a provocative answer to this question, right? I mean, I think the most valuable knowledge is not the knowledge that you find in other countries, but that's the knowledge that you find in your own country. I believe many of the solutions for Indonesia are already in Indonesia, right? It's the local knowledge, it's the local wisdom that countries fail to fully harness, right? Knowledge is often seen as, yeah, that knowledge needs to come from some developed country somewhere. But every country has their own development path. Every country has their own special cultures and challenges, and they don't always apply, right? I mean, the solutions are not always transferable. You know, there might be a solution that has been developed in the US that works in the US, but it does not work elsewhere. It has been developed by people in the US for people in the US, right? And the same, in my view, is also in many cases true in other countries. In Indonesia, and that's why, you know, I showcased this example from the Bursa Inovasi, because it's one of those examples where you can really show there is a lot of innovations happening in the country, and the challenge is that these innovations rarely get shared, right? It's like at the individual level, if you don't share, it gets lost, nobody knows about it, and it just it just stays where it is. It's never going to be taken to scale. And so a lot of the solutions to the challenges that Indonesia is facing, in my view, are solvable by harnessing the innovation capacity of its citizens, of local communities, of the private sector, etc. Wherever the challenges may incur, right, at different levels of society, you'll find the capacity to innovate, and very often the solutions may already be there, right? I mean, to very, very difficult development challenges. When we're looking at the challenge of climate change, for example, right? I mean, the impacts of climate change are global, but they're felt locally, right? And communities around the world are struggling with the impacts of climate change, and they come up with adaptation strategies to overcome those impacts, to manage the impacts that they're facing. Right? They have to innovate. They don't have a choice. And that capacity to innovate, to solve problems, I believe is inherent in every country. Before looking too far out, what others are doing, it sometimes helps to already be very much aware of the capacity within the country, because nobody will be able to solve the problems of Indonesia better than the people of Indonesia. There may be certain inspirations that can be drawn from other countries, right? I'm not saying that international knowledge sharing is not valuable. I mean, it's very valuable. But I do think there's often a misconception that tends to draw us to a few developed countries or academics or etc. That seem as the viable solutions for everything, while they may not be always applicable in every context.
Thank you. So we need to be aware of our own capacities too, yeah, Steffen. All right, thank you, Pak Iwan. I hope that answer your question, yeah, satisfactory. We still have one more person on the Zoom room, Steffen. So this is Miss Ismutarti Satiti. Can you please unmute yourself and make your question brief, please?
Hello. Yes. Thank you, Bu Effie. Good morning, Mr. Steffen and Bu Effie juga. It's long time no see, Bu Effie. I'm a custom officer, and my question today is that in today's disruptive era, there a lot of data, knowledge that we can learn it from social media. Many things can be obtained quickly, but the difficulty is, in my opinion, is to select and place the data we need most in the organization. We always annually or daily or monthly report, but sometimes the organization cannot grouping and cannot take the beneficial for the data or the knowledge. Yes, because maybe even though we can collect it, but sometimes it cannot be useful effectively, because we cannot group it, or maybe we can, if the data or the knowledge is very raw, or we cannot group the data and knowledge that we really need. So what's your suggestion, Mr. Steffen? Thank you.
Thank you. Another really interesting question. I mean, my angle to this is, I know there's a culture in Indonesia of reporting, right? I mean, there's a huge data stream that is feeding the beast from the local districts to the provinces, all the way to national government in Jakarta. You know, when I was working in Indonesia, I was always impressed of how much data is being collected, and I'm always wondering, you know, how much is that data actually being analyzed and used, right? As I mentioned earlier, I mean, I do think there's a lot of value in having data, right? I mean, because it helps to quantify certain results. It helps to identify patterns and monitor and evaluate performance targets as well, in terms of specific indicators that you want to measure, right? And so I would be the last person to say that is not valuable. But what I'm missing very often in this collection effort is again the how-to, right? We're collecting data, we're not collecting knowledge. So my hope would be that governments would make more efforts, not only collecting results, but also collecting the solution paths to those results, and really starting to understand of what works and what doesn't in terms of policy implementation, for example, right? And then better understanding some of the barriers to policy implementation, better understanding also what are some innovations that may happen in terms of policy innovation to overcome some of these barriers, right? So all of these efforts will not be captured by the data that you're currently collecting in your data collection efforts, right? So it comes back to something that we discussed earlier, right? I mean, that We have a results culture, and that is clearly important. We need to measure results. We want to measure results. That is an important way for us to inform our decisions going forward. But we don't necessarily have a learning culture, right? And so thinking through how we can somewhat get a balance, right? Not only looking at data, but also looking at how that data was actually achieved, and how those results were actually achieved, and the solution paths that may or may not have worked. That is the essence of learning, right? And that's where, in my view, the meaning is being made, right? I mean, learning is all about making meaning of something. Yes, you can make a data analysis, and you can compare, and you have all kinds of quantitative analysis that you can draw from data. But what the data story is only part of that story, right? That whole qualitative side of the how-to is usually very difficult to get from the data, unless you make a deliberate effort and look at that qualitative side, right? And look at the how-to side. And of course, that is much more difficult to do, right? I mean, you actually have to then go into the field, and you have to talk to people, and you have to harness that knowledge. That is the type of approach that we had with those Bursa Animasi, right? It was a massive undertaking, but I do believe it was a very valuable experience of working with knowledge at scale. And I think up to date, it has been the largest effort of any country anywhere that I'm aware of that has undergone such a tremendous effort in terms of harnessing knowledge. And they had lots of data streams as well, right? I mean, there's lots of data that is being fed from the villages all the way up to the Ministry of Finance, right? I mean, in terms of informing then the development plan, or the development plans, and the fiscal transfers that are being sent back down to the villages.
Very much for your answer, Steffen.
Thank you.
Right, so let's see here, in the interest of time, I think we can no longer address the rest of the question, I'm afraid. So that was the last question from our participants, Steffen. So, all right, Steffen, is there any few last messages or thing you want to address to our audience for your closing remarks?
Well, I mean, just to thank you. I mean, I was so excited to even see the headlines of this learning week, right? I mean, when Titis approached me of this, it's like, wow, what a remarkable, fantastic undertaking, right? Not a lot of organizations are putting an emphasis on becoming a learning organization, and I just find it really commendable, and I want to commend all of you, and then also your senior management to support such a learning week, and support such an emphasis on learning, right? I mean, I do think that is a critical step in becoming a learning organization itself, that you start to even discuss this as an area of work, right? I mean, many organizations don't. And those organizations, certainly in the private sector, they will eventually find themselves out of business, right? And those organizations that continuously invest in the capacity to learn, in the capacity to share knowledge, in the private sector, that is a must, right? And if you don't do this in today's world, you'll find yourself out of business very, very quickly. And I think in the public service, that is increasingly being recognized as well, right? The incentives are slightly different in the public service. It's not so much about the bottom line and profit maximization. In the public service, it's much more about effective service delivery to the citizens of a country, right? So it's the incentives are slightly different, or the objectives are slightly different, but the goal is still the same. It's how do we harness the tremendous experiences and knowledge that is accumulated in the heads of our staff, right? And how do we make that knowledge available to our peers and harness this in the most effective way, so we can maybe be more resource effective in our approaches, or we increase the quality of our services to our constituents. So I want to commend you for this effort. It's a journey that never ends. So I want to also mention that you are embarking on a journey that is an eternal journey, right? I mean, it's you can always improve. There's no end at becoming a learning organization, becoming a knowledge-sharing organization. You can always do better, but you will see if you take this very seriously, and I know you do, you will see very quick progress in terms of how this influences the organizational culture, how this influences staff, how they come to work, they enjoy working with their peers, with their colleagues, and learn from each other and grow as individuals, right? I mean, ultimately, there's a big benefit to knowledge sharing for all of us, is that we not only grow the organization, but we also grow ourselves as individuals. And I think you are on a remarkable path to get there, and I just want to commend you for that, and I want to thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to have been connected with you over this call, and I hope I see some of you at some point in time next time I'm in Indonesia.
That's our pleasure too, Steffen. Right, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, that's the end of our today's session with Steffen on becoming a knowledge sharing organization. But let me just repeat something to bear in mind here a little bit here, that we have heard some, importance, pertaining to knowledge sharing organization here, like some things that mentioned by Steffen are like empowering people, especially people in our organization for better decision making, providing collaboration too, especially across silos here, and we can retain experience from our experts and not get lost of many lessons here, and then we can do better in less time with fewer resources, but result in better problem solving too and decision making, and also then we can increase sustainability of service delivery, and then we can replicate, scale up, even until international collaboration too here. So, okay, again, Steffen, thank you for being with us today. All right, I will soon return the screen to our MC. I'm Evri Diah Indrawati signing out. Back to you, Mbak Titis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bu Evi, for moderating today's session. And I would like to applaud Steffen for your insightful presentation today. It was much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned in my opening, today is the last day of the Ministry of Finance Learning Week this year. However, we are pleased to inform that our next agenda in Learning Festival, the National Symposium of Public Finance, is about to begin next week on October 26th and 27th. Please save the date and don't forget to join us. On behalf of the committee, we would like to send our most profound appreciation for your support and attendance. Don't forget to give your feedback about this webinar. Stay safe and healthy. See you next time. I'm Titis Rahayu. Good day. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.